Why does someone choose to go into a company that is struggling after having served with the federal government and C-level roles at some of the biggest companies in the world to then go back on the field and deal with all the stress that comes from?
None of the things I've ever done in my career were direct predictors of the thing I was going to do next.
You've met some of the most important people in the world: Obama, Bill Gates, I'm sure there's others. Who impressed you the most?
Bill Gates was famous for saying, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard."
What does it do to you to be in the Oval Office? All right, before we dive in, you're listening to the Executive Brand Podcast with me, your host, Thormeier. Each week, I sit down with top B2B CEOs, executive, and founders to break down their playbooks. If you've not yet, it would really help if you subscribe or follow the show because it helps us get on better guests and create better content for you guys. All right, let's dive in. All right, I'm here with Tony Scott, the CEO of Intrusion. Intrusion is a publicly traded cybersecurity company in the applied threat intelligence category. Before joining Intrusion in 2021, Tony was the CTO at General Motors, CIO at Disney, CIO at Microsoft, CIO at VMware, and Federal CIO of the US government under President Obama. He's also a board member at TGen and Rackspace Technology. He was inducted into the CIO Magazine CIO Hall of Fame. And Tony is an avid boater and a licensed pilot, enjoys skiing and motorcycling. And I'll stop there, Tony, and you correct me if we need to correct or amend anything in that intro.
No, it's all right.
All good, okay.
Back lots of memories, actually.
Well, I'm very excited to speak to you because I don't think I've ever talked to someone with a more impressive career, and I'm sure there's lots of stories and lessons on leadership and technology in there. So I'm looking forward to dive into that. But maybe first question, you had a lot of big important roles. I was just curious what the most stressful week in your career was out of all of that.
There's probably three that come to mind. The first one, and I'll do them sort of in, historical order. The first one was Y2K. That fateful weekend when the clocks turned from 1999, December 30th, 31st to January 1st. And I was with General Motors. We had tons of legacy technology, mainframes and other technologies that we'd spent a couple of years verifying that they were remediated. We had contingency plans. But if you recall those times...
I was 4 years old.
Okay, well, the point was much of the computer systems were never designed to last as long as they did. And there were predictions that the world was going to go nuts as the clock turned over to the year 2000. Because the computers would just fail or they would get the dates wrong. So companies spent tons of money remediating and testing and all that sort of stuff. And it was the biggest non-event in world's history. I mean, I can't recall a single thing that went bad or didn't work, which is a testimony to the good work everyone did. But, there was probably excessive amounts of money spent on this to prevent, what probably would have been minor impact anyhow, even if the worst had happened. So that one, but it was stressful because nobody knew for sure. But I think it was also the first time that people fully realized in some sort of way all of the dependencies on technology that had emerged kind of crept into our lives over time. Certainly the internet was there, but there were lots of other things as well, from, appliances to cars to, television networks to space travel to, all kinds of things that were highly dependent on technology. So that was probably the first one,
Mm-hmm.
just in terms of stress and not knowing what the outcome was going to be. And then it was over, and it was like, oh, that was no big deal.
Yeah. A nothing burger.
Yeah, exactly, as you would say. The second one was at Disney when I had just been there a few weeks, and I got a phone call that our main data center in Orlando, Florida, had gone completely dark. And as it turned out, it was a lightning strike that hit a flagpole outside the data center and caused an electrical malfunction inside the data center in the electrical switch room. Now, I was brand new to Disney, so I didn't at that point have a full understanding of how good our backups were, or our failover processes, or any of that sort of stuff. Fortunately, the company had done a good job on those things. We didn't lose revenue. We didn't have any impact on business or whatever, but it was a stressful couple of days when, you trying to figure out what happened, why it happened, and then start the recovery efforts. And that's a longer story, but this data center was not initially designed as a data center. It had been a construction warehouse. It had been a food distribution warehouse at one point. It had been a number of different things. It was one of the first buildings that Disney ever built in the Orlando property, even before the theme parks existed, while they were under construction. And then over time, it had been converted into a data center rather than being purpose-built. So as it turned out, nobody realized that this flagpole was connected to a piece of rebar that was served as a common ground point for all the electrical equipment in the data center. And so the big question in my life has been, Florida is the lightning capital of the United States, and why Mother Nature waited until I was CIO to strike that, flagpole and cause the outage, will remain unanswered forever, I guess.
To build resilience.
Yeah, exactly. And then probably the third one was just, again, I'd been in the Federal CIO role just a few weeks, and we discovered the Office of Personnel Management had been compromised, and 21 million identities, compromised. And then that led to a pretty hectic next couple of years as we remediated and tried to fix a lot of the cybersecurity issues that the government had at that point. So three pretty different, but very memorable. I can play back the tape pretty easily in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're good at inheriting what other people messed up, and it happening to you in the first couple of weeks of. I'm curious, like after those experiences, if memory serves, when you joined Intrusion in 2021, from what I read, the company was kind of struggling. You over the last couple of years, you turned around the company. Why, especially with those stressful weeks, shouldn't you have just gone for a well-deserved retirement? Why does someone choose to go into a company that is struggling after having served, with the federal government and C-level roles at some of the biggest companies in the world, to then go back on the field and deal with all the stress that comes from?
Well, it really had to do with, I had, after leaving the federal role, I'd been serving on boards and investing in technology, early stage technology companies. And I probably, over the 2 or 3 years I was doing that, looked at, 50 or 60 companies. And when I ran across Intrusion, my initial thought was not to come join it. The company was in trouble for a variety of different reasons, mostly having to do with the former CEO who only had been there a few months. The original founder of Intrusion had unfortunately passed away from a heart attack or something. Then they had an interim CEO for a few months who is the one who kind of really tanked the company at that point. But I originally looked at them because I thought they might have really interesting IP. And I also thought because of just the rise of human resource needs for talented cybersecurity people, maybe we could find roles for some of their talented, technical people in other companies that we were working with. But as I began my due diligence and really met the team and did a much deeper dive on their IP, I realized that it would be a bad outcome if this were to just die or get, separated out. That it was a very unique team and a very unique set of capabilities, and immediately I started thinking about how can this be, rescued or turned around, and ultimately presented a plan to the board. I thought maybe they would hire us as a consultant, but the board said, we'd really like you to come on as CEO. So it wasn't, a planned thing so much, but when I met the team, saw the IP, I thought, boy, I really think this could be a great adventure to see if we can turn this around. So,
Love it.
and I'll say the other thing, Finn, that is true about this is none of the things I've ever done in my career were direct predictors of the thing I was going to do next. So as odd as this leap may seem from, these big forums to this tiny little company, it's not uncharacteristic of other experiences I've had in life. I actually started my career at Sun Microsystems, way back in the day when it was a pretty small company, and then did a couple of startups before all of the things that you mentioned. So I've either had experience in really small startup sort of worlds or this mega world, the ones that everybody sort of knows about. But as I said, none were predictors of the next thing. So
you've met some of the most important people in the world, Obama, Bill Gates, I'm sure there's others. Who impressed you the most?
I'd say every leader for me has left me with some very important lessons about, sort of leadership and life and so on. And at the same time, I've also had a list of maybe don't do things that leaders have left an impression on me with. And I think that's just a part of experiencing these roles is, fashioning for yourself what's going to work, for you individually, but also taking lessons from these renowned leaders. And I'll just mention a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Gates was famous for saying, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." And he would say that in many meetings, early on. And, that could be a very intimidating thing if you're presenting to Bill Gates and, here's the richest guy in the world, and he says that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. That puts you in really rare territory. But he did it, and by the way, other leaders at Microsoft then emulated that. So you might hear that from others as well. But it was really a test of your mettle. Had this person really done their homework? Do they really understand the nature of the problem? And so you either had one of two choices. You could either, fold up into a little ball and cry, and and just collapse, or you could, have a response that was thoughtful and revealed the depth of your knowledge and understanding on the subject. And so in many meetings, I saw people actually respond that way and not only survive but thrive because of the subsequent interaction that took place. Now, that's not a style I've tried to emulate.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever said to anybody that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I might be thinking it some. Just not a style I chose to emulate. Another leader that I worked with had a habit when he didn't understand something that was being presented to him, he'd say, "How fascinating." And you never knew what that meant, right? Was he impressed or, just bewildered or what? And it left people speechless. They didn't know how to respond. And I learned from that you have to be more specific about how you're responding to somebody in a presentation or a conversation. It's okay to say, "I'm sorry, I don't understand this piece of it," or that. But just to say how fascinating kind of ends the ends the dialogue and doesn't really get you anywhere.
Anything from Obama? I don't know if you had real interactions with him. Maybe you didn't. But
the interaction face to face in the meeting, you could expect, great questions. He had encouraged dialogue. He'd, sort of ask and engage, usually pretty deeply. I remember the first day in the Oval Office, I was sitting there and we were presenting. My team had created a dashboard that was showing how many people were visiting federal websites real time. And he was impressed, and Vice President Biden at the time was in the room, and both of them were asking a lot of great questions, and, what did it mean, and how long did it take to develop, and, lots of great questions. And that became a pattern, that I saw over the next 2 years. What was really impressive, though, is we also were involved in developing white papers on various topics. And we'd send in a draft to the president, and usually overnight we would get back a markup of our draft with all kinds of notes and questions.
From him?
From him, yeah.
Wow.
In his kind of handwriting, in the margins on the document and so on. And it showed the sort of law professor side of him, I think, which was to think about problems from all perspectives, not just a single point of view, but to think about what are the options, what are the alternatives, what's the opposite argument going to be, those kinds of things. So very, very thoughtful person, from my perspective.
What does it do to you to be in the Oval Office? Did it sink in for you?
Well, the first time it was just like, I've told people this story, but there's something called the imposter syndrome, that people have, which is, I finally risen to my level of incompetence, and what the heck am I doing here? And boy, oh boy, are they going to find out quick that I don't know what I'm doing? And, all these crazy thoughts go through your head. And this is on top of all the other experiences I'd had too, right? So why would you think that way? But you just always naturally do.
Yeah.
And so that's a feeling that you have. And then there's also the feeling of, oh my God, I'm sitting in the Oval Office, probably the most rare place to be on the planet, in terms of, the number of people who actually get to be in that sort of, are privileged enough in some way or another to be in that,
Yeah.
in that rare place. So it's very memorable from that perspective. And then similarly, the first meeting in the Situation Room, where you're covering classified, topics. You see this in the movies, and but you never really imagine yourself being in that situation. It's equally, impressive, the first time.
Yeah.
But oddly enough, 6 months in, you've been in the
Somehow.
Oval Office a couple of times. You've been in the Situation Room a bunch of times. And it's like, oh yeah, this is where I work, It's kind of like everything else.
New normal. I've never talked to someone who had a C-level role at such a large company. I mean, Microsoft was, I guess, Fortune 5 at the time, maybe Fortune 1. I don't know if they were at the time the biggest company in the world, but there's only a handful of people who ever make it to a C-level title at a Fortune 5 company. What does it take to get into that seat that maybe people miss?
I think there's a lot of different paths that people take into those roles. Mine was not a predictable path. One of the questions that I struggle with answering, if I talk to college kids, they'll ask for career advice and, what should they do next? And it's just hard for me to answer that question based on my own experience. I'd say the one thing that seemed to work for me was just to be open to the possibilities of a very different opportunity than the one that you're in. Most people think very linearly, like I'm going to be in finance and I got to have this role and then this role and then this role and then this role. And my career has been more this way, jagged in terms of industries, in terms of, what the challenges were and even how I got there, right? Many of them, in fact, all of them were a recruiter finding me somehow and saying, this looks like maybe an interesting person for this role. I have heard from the recruiters that the thing that piqued their curiosity was the fact that I went to law school, but I was in tech.
Mm.
And they didn't know a lot of, technology people, CIOs or what have you, that also had a law degree. And so quite often that was one of the first questions that the recruiter would ask me in that first initial phone call. They'd say, you got an interesting background, looks like you've had some good experiences here, but I've never talked to anybody who went to law school and then, was in tech. And I had to explain to them that I actually was an adult in tech and then decided to go to law school. And I did that when I was at Sun Microsystems.
Why did you do that?
I worked with a bunch of people who had their graduate degrees. They were MBAs or in some cases lawyers. and I had wanted to get a advanced degree, but really wasn't sure, what I wanted to do. And Santa Clara University had a joint law degree and MBA program where you could get both. I knew I wasn't going to do both, but I didn't know which one would appeal to me the most. I kind of, explored both a little bit. So I signed up for the joint program knowing that I could veer one way or the other early on in the program. And the first classes I took were law classes, and I just loved it, and very quickly decided that's the route for me. And the benefit to me of that has been much better ability for critical thinking that law school just uniquely provides that opportunity. And I would say it's helped me through my whole career, probably more than any other thing that I've ever done. So anyhow, that's got the recruiters interested, and then, things happen from there.
Maybe the takeaway there is, if you want unique opportunities, work on having a unique set of skills, unique background, like have a computer science degree and a degree in, I don't know, law or computer science and art. It's those are unusual combinations, and I'm sure that alone stands out to people, and you might get opportunities that people who just fit into the perfect box, you're competing with a million other people who fit that perfect box. Any tips for founders or CEOs who are selling into the enterprise or the government? You were in the role, CIO at Microsoft, VMware, where a lot of the startup founders and CEOs who are early stage who are listening to this podcast would die to have a meeting with, to pitch their product, their technology. Can you talk a little bit about what it actually takes to sell to such a company or the government? What back then would get your attention? What actually helps getting a meeting when you're in that role, trying to, get the attention of the CIO at big company?
Well, yeah. First, it starts with research. In selecting your targets, carefully. In each of the roles that I either had already, as I took the role, a team that was focused on innovation and those kinds of things, or I created one because I saw it as a necessary part of the role. With technology just keeps evolving, and as we've seen lately, moving faster and faster and faster. So I've always had this bias that if you're not paying attention to what's coming next, you're probably in a losing battle. So I would say, number one, find the companies that have that sort of innovation orientation. And they exist in the Fortune 500. It's not every one. But I'll also tell you, if they don't have it, they're not going to be in the Fortune 500, forever. Because so much just depends on technology innovation these days. So, find the group within the organization that's responsible for that. Second thing is, do your homework and find a problem that they are interested in solving. If you come to pitch me on some really innovative technology, but it doesn't address a problem that I have, or I may know I have the problem, or I may not know I have the problem. But if you can point out to me a problem that needs solving that's relevant to my organization, whether it's an opportunity to save money or an opportunity to do something faster or improve quality or, you name it, I'll probably listen.
And I'll get that information through the public filings, or how would I figure
That's
out
one way, getting to know people in the company. You can look at, what the company is recruiting. for. You can talk to former employees of the company. I mean, there's a whole bunch of ways
Yeah.
to sort of do your research to uncover these things. And it takes time. It's not, just show
Yeah.
up one day and say, hey, I got the greatest idea in the world.
When would you take the meeting? Because obviously you have a massive team. You have VPs and directors underneath you who are managing all kinds of spaces and sub priorities. So I'm assuming, like, what would it need to be for you to actually be in the meeting?
Well, let me describe the process a little bit. Some of these opportunities would filter up through my direct reports, who might or might not be part of the innovation discovery group that I had. So the guy who's in charge of, let's say, data centers, he might or she might run across something and do some work on their own and then say, hey, I want to really escalate this and share this with my boss. So some things would come that way. With the innovation group, I would always give them a set of be on the lookout for technologies or innovation that can address these 3 or 4 problems that we're highly focused on. So they were out actually scouting and looking for solutions. So that might be an avenue. And then sometimes it would come from peers. I always worked in a group of other CIOs from different industries in either the business sector I was in or sometimes in the geography that I was present in. And we'd meet, maybe quarterly or, those kinds of things. But the common thing that those groups always did was share, hey, I just saw the neatest, whatever,
Yeah.
and we're already doing something with it. And we'd all pay attention, because when it got to that level, it usually meant this was something worth considering. So those were probably the primary ways that.
Did you ever take a meeting from like a cold call or a cold email, or was it at that point basically it's either an intro or it bubbled up or a colleague mentioned something because it's just so gate kept?
I did occasionally, but it wasn't the normal
Yeah.
path. Sometimes it would happen, but not the normal
Yep.
path.
Now you both bought and built a lot of technology with AI at a very high level. How do you see AI just changing the landscape of vendors, how companies decide whether they should build or buy, consolidation of vendors? Will there be more point solution? Will there be more broad platforms? How do you just see AI changing this landscape of technology solutions?
I think today what we're seeing is a lot of sort of, I'll call it siloed implementations of AI. So, the HR department will, pick a AI technology to improve its HR processes, and the marketing department will choose something that's proven
Well, a bunch
value.
of things. They're probably using 7 different
Oh,
tools.
sure, yeah, but very focused on their part of the business, right? And similarly, finance or,
Yeah.
pick any of the other departments. And I think all of those are going to, result in, a ecosystem of, successes and some failures, and it'll get sorted out.
Yeah.
And the HR community will have some view of what's the best AI for HR, and same thing for finance and marketing and whatever. But I think that the biggest opportunity actually is in solving some of the cross-organizational issues that exist in almost every company. And if you were to sort of map out the architecture of the systems in companies and overlay the org chart of the company on that map, you'd see a pretty close, one-to-one
Right.
sort of relationship, because that's just the way we've implemented technology. The ERP systems, of the last 20 years have tried to bring together a consolidated financial view of the company. And in some ways, the business processes have gotten more streamlined, but there's still a whole bunch of governance issues and opportunities because of the friction that exists in that hierarchical sort of structure that you get in large enterprise. And I think one of the biggest opportunities for AI is to now go address some of those, organizational, frictional impediments to fast decision making, pivoting, innovation, some of those kinds of challenges.
Anything specific that you have in mind?
Well, I've seen some, and we've all experienced this, I think, in our lives. Issues where you're a customer, in particular, of a company, and the org chart gets in the way of, your satisfaction or something that you need done that has to cross over, to some other part of the organization. It just takes forever, and it might not be, satisfactory. There was an example I saw recently where Tesla was developing a customer service system, and of course they're using AI to respond to some of these customer service issues. But the designer of this system realized that customers needed to be able to, with AI, do the equivalent of get me a person to
Right.
talk to. And so they wrote into the program, if you use the word escalate, it would be guaranteed to get to a human. I personally had an experience with another company, not Tesla, where I wrote a lengthy, constructive feedback letter about what my personal experience was. And I got back a AI form letter, if you will, giving me very detailed responses to everything that I wrote. But the responses were, we're sorry that you experienced, blah, 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 blah. We'll try to do better next time.
Right. And especially if that comes from an AI generated answer.
And we're sorry that you experienced this, and we're sorry that you experienced that, sincerely,
AI.
and it's a made up name with no phone number, no contact info, and so on. And what did that do? It just pissed me off,
Yeah.
And made me vow never to use that, again, ever, and so and by the way, my issue in this particular case crossed multiple departments of that particular organization. It was this happened to be an airline, but it was ticketing, it was baggage, it was a bunch of different departments that clearly didn't coordinate with one another, and so that would be my quintessential example of where it might be needed. But you see this in every company where the org chart, in some ways, impresses itself on in a negative way in terms of responsiveness or agility or whatever.
Yeah. I think I read somewhere that, obviously you had a lot of meetings with vendors, and I think I read somewhere that you had a secret signal with your assistant that when it
Yes.
would turn bad, or you knew that the vendor meeting is not going well and you needed to get out, that you had a secret signal.
Exactly.
Is that true? And what was the secret signal?
Oh, I'm not telling you the secret signal, but
Are you using it right now to get out of this podcast?
no.
You're
It
still
was
using it
different.
today.
In every organization, it was a little different. Sometimes my admin could see. So it was a visual signal.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes it was a digital one. But we always had something worked out where I could be rescued, if it
What was
wasn't.
the easiest tell or the quickest tell that you needed to be rescued out of a vendor meeting? Like, what would they do that would immediately be the big red flag that, you signaled your assistant to get you out of there?
Oh, it was if they started the conversation with what keeps you up at night,
Oh,
which clearly showed they had done no research on me, the company, the current things that we were working on. That was usually a bad start. Um, and if it was just a fishing expedition to try to
mm-hmm.
come up with something that could be of value, it just told me immediately these are amateurs. You know,
Unprepared.
this is just not going to be
Yeah.
a fruitful conversation.
Now on AI, I mean, you lived through multiple big technology changes, transformation, mainframes to the cloud, and now AI. And I mean, you were in a leadership role at a large tech company as these changes were happening. What lessons did you learn back then that do inform and apply today as we're going through this transition with AI?
There's sort of a couple, and these transitions were, sort of mainframe to client server to, uh, um, the PC, revolution,
Mm-hmm.
then to the cloud and internet, interspersed with all of those things. And now it's AI, obviously. And there was a ERP, sort of big transition in there somewhere along the way as well. Um, and each of those have had meaningful impact on how we conduct business, our business processes, the kinds of skills and abilities that we need in our organizations, and so on. And so, to me, it's always been important to have a thorough understanding of where you are, have a deep understanding of the context that you find yourself in
Mm.
as an organization, as the whole, and then try to sort out what are the likely impacts of some of these big transitions that are either currently occurring or on their way to occurring. And then what does that mean for us? How do we have to adapt? What do we have to do different than we're doing today? And it might be a talent issue, it might be a training issue, it might be a technology swap issue, it might be a whole re-architecture kind of issue. I've certainly experienced all of those.
Yeah. What's the biggest one for AI that you maybe see on the horizon that is slowly happening, that you think will happen, on how it will massively impact how we run companies?
It's
Uh,
probably governance. I mean, I think the technology is going to just keep advancing, but I predict, somebody asked me recently, give me a prediction for 2026. And I think one of the things that's inevitably going to happen in 2026, if not before, and we only have a few weeks left in 25, is there's going to be some really big, nasty disaster or perceived disaster as the result of the abuse or misuse or accidental use of AI.
mhm.
Something that's going to be attention grabbing, and people are going to go, oh my God, we didn't realize that could happen, right? Um, I think back to, I was sitting in my office at General Motors in Detroit, and I was talking on my cell phone to somebody in New York. And this person said, oh my God, the lights just went out in all of New York City, a complete blackout. And a few seconds later, there was the same thing in Detroit, right? And we're 1,000 miles apart or something like that. And I thought, oh my God, this is the end of the world. World War III has started. Something really nasty has caused this. Well, it was a simple mechanical failure. The electrical grids were all connected together, and they had load balancing technology and all kinds of things um, in place, but something in the middle of all of that failed and then triggered a domino effect, and it took down, and it was a couple $100 part or something. I don't even remember now exactly what it was. Um, and we're going to have that in with AI, and I'm guessing sooner rather than later, because our building so much on top of this, and we don't understand all the frailties and single points of failure and other kinds of things associated with that. And when that a failure occurs, that's going to bring on a bunch of governance, regulatory, inspection, those kinds of things. It's you know, the crisis that then will, create a bunch of responses. I don't know when, I don't know where, I don't know how, but it's easily predictable that that will happen, because it's happened with every other, critical invention that we've
Right.
ever had.
What did flying teach you about business, if anything?
Ah, great analogy for me there. I can teach anyone to take an airplane off. It's really easy. Every flying, any person who aspires to fly and takes a training lesson, in the first hour or two, they'll get you in the plane and teach you how to take the airplane off. That's the really easy part. Not a lot of magic to it, assuming that the airplane is working. But there are failures that do occur, but landing the plane is the hard part, and takes a lot of practice and constant practice, and it's a skill that goes away and sort of deteriorates if not practiced regularly. And so, to me, it's landing the plane that's the important part of anything that you do. Ideas are great, and that's the takeoff. You got to have a spark of an idea to do anything, but then making it happen is the equivalent of landing the plane, and that's where the real action is. How do you actually get something to market? How do you make it successful? That's a lot of practice and a lot of work usually.
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking where my mind was going just because we were talking about the AI thing and how it's going to go wrong. We clearly managed the takeoff for
Yeah.
AI. What's the landing part?
Well, the landing part will be, it's safe, it's reliable, it's cost effective, it's um, socially responsible. It's not doing harmful things. Um, I think it's improving health. It's improving people's lives. It's making us more efficient. Um, Probably, I would worry about the uh, ecology. Today it takes an awful lot of electricity and space and water and everything else for these big data centers that we're building for AI. And I hope there's some breakthroughs that make it more ecologically sound. You know,
Yeah.
I think those are all big opportunities, to land the plane on that one.
Yeah. Now, last question before we wrap up. We've, I'd say, had the have the honor and pleasure to work with you on your LinkedIn and helping you create content there and sharing all those lessons there. I'm curious, like from your perspective. I mean, you're a very busy person. You have lots of important things to do. Why would you dedicate time to putting your insights and lessons and thoughts on the industry out on LinkedIn?
For us, I think it's been a couple of things. Primarily we want to let the world know about intrusion and what we do. But we exist in a broad ecosystem of technology companies and people who are trying to make the world a better place, if you will. And some of these issues that we deal with from a very clinical, narrow perspective actually extend beyond what our technology does. And I think it's important as leaders to talk about those things, to share ideas, share learnings. And so for us, that's been the beneficial part of this. It's allowed us to participate in a bigger, broader conversation than just the set of narrow things that we do, but also provide insight into some of the unique things that occur in our corner of the world that folks might not be aware of. So a lot of benefit, and we get a lot of great feedback too, by the way. Wanting to engage and discuss and talk about some of these things.
I mean, I know
All that valuable. So
from your content, also because obviously from the track record that you've built, I don't think I've ever seen someone who gets such senior people to engage with your content. I mean, you get ex-CIOs of Microsoft and CISOs and all kinds of people writing very long, meaty comments on your content. So it's been awesome there. And Tony, that we're at the hour. I managed to actually ask, I would say, 80% of my questions, so I'm pretty happy.
Well, that's good.
There we go. Thank you so much for taking the time. If people want to check you out or check out Intrusion, I'll obviously link all of that down in the show notes. And thank you, Tony, for taking the time.
My pleasure.
All right, this podcast is brought to you by Project 33. Project 33 is the leading executive thought leadership agency for LinkedIn. If you're looking to activate your founder, your CEO, your executives, or any of your internal subject matter experts and create thought leadership content for them to build trust and credibility for your brand, reach out at project33.io.